Hello and welcome to an Infinity the Game battle report. Today we're playing the Jurisdictional Command of Corregidor versus the JSA Oban, and the scenario is Evacuation. Now, today's battle report challenge comes courtesy of channel supporter Grey Stranger, who made the request for a Corregidor game, possibly including a Gecko duo. Unfortunately, this list does not include a Gecko duo. It's not something that I felt I could put in the list in this scenario, so we've gone with a Gecko Haris instead. We have two Geckos, but because Geckos can form both a duo and a Haris in Corregidor, actually I strongly recommend running them as a Haris team if you can do so, just in terms of how your list is constructed. The reason for this is that, well, firstly, duo bonuses, which you get from having two geckos in the link, are beneficial, and there are a number of decent wild cards in Corregidor that you can just hand that out to, and it's worth doing. But secondly, even though geckos have access to Robbie bots, which gives them access to a deployable specialist, deploying these remotes breaks them out of the link team, and geckos are not good enough at gunfighting by themselves to play without that +1 special die if you think you can avoid it. So in this instance, what we've done is that we have added Valerio Gromos into the Haris team to make it into a 3-person team. And this gives us not only an additional hacker and a linked pitcher, but also a specialist who can join the link team and be the specialist in the link team without the geckos needing to break the link and deploy the synchronized Robbie bots. So overall, although the request was technically for a gecko duo, a gecko Haris I think is probably better in this, and in fact in most cases. Up next, we have a Bandit Forward Observer. Now, this is a very good piece. I think just generally, I really like the Bandit rework. Not only are they an excellent offensive element in their own right, with just a bunch of really good and interesting skills, Infiltration Reroll is really cool and potentially really fun to play with, although I wouldn't use it in this particular game. But Evacuation is one of those very rare scenarios. In fact, I think it's the only scenario in the current ITS season which has a Forward Observer mission bonus. And so even though the Bandit's willpower is not fantastic, sitting at willpower 12, it needs a 15 to pick up the civilians because you get a +3 to synchronize civilian, and then it's rolling 2 dice on 15s to evac them. And being an infiltrator, that can roll multiple dice potentially on 15s to conduct the scenario objectives, particularly in a scenario that is as order intensive as Evacuation, makes it really good. Now, I would have liked to include two of them, but unfortunately, once you have committed to a tag, duo, or Haris, you do have to make some limitations in terms of how the list is constructed. We then have a duo, 2 Jaguars. Now, ideally, I think I would have liked one of these to be a 1 point more expensive Jaguar, where you get access to things like the Panzerfaust while still keeping smoke grenades. It's really nice to have that 1 point to upgrade a Jaguar, but I just didn't have the 1 point in this list. It's running very, very tight, and there is one particular piece that I wanted to include mostly for the list name, which is the Gator Pilot, and so the Gator Pilot ended up displacing a 11-point Jaguar that would have given me that Panzerfaust arrow. But 2 Jaguars is plenty, both for potential close assault of opportunity, but realistically, linked smoke because there's an intruder. We then have a single transductor zone. 1 I think is a fine number. There is going to be a second transductor zone equivalent in the form of Billy, and 2 repeaters in your deployment zone is usually enough. We then have the first of 2 Masai Morans, the cheapest Masai Moran at 15 points. But it is, once again, a very good specialist and just piece generally in the scenario. Midfield defense that you can concentrate either on clumps of HVTs or protecting the actual evacuation consoles is very, very valuable, which makes the Morans excellent. And on top of that, they are infiltrating forward observers, which makes them just generally good at doing the mission in this scenario, although of course they don't have camouflage, which can limit their ability to move around. We then have 2 Alguaciles, one of whom is the Lieutenant. There's no NCO in this particular list, so the Lieutenant order will go unspent, but we have plenty of tactical awareness. And so those 2 Alguaciles will just spend the entire game split apart on different corners of the deployment zone, hoping that no one attacks them. In Combat Group 2, we then have a mix of firepower, hacking, utility, and specialist presence with an intruder. The Intruder HMG and pieces like it are things that I've sung the praise on the channel in the past. Having access to the combination of visor and smoke shooting mods and mimetism. Yes, it's a single wound piece, which is absolutely going to come up in this particular game, but there are just a whole variety of targets in Infinity at present that can be kind of cleanly dealt with a piece like an Intruder. And since I am spending so many of my points and SWC on firepower pieces in the form of the Geckos that don't really reach out beyond 24 inches, having a HMG just makes a lot of sense. We then have Jazz and Billy. They're very good. There's no reason not to include them. They add just a whole bunch of utility, right? Billy is our second deployment zone repeater. Jazz takes care of our killer hacking. They're just good. I don't need to justify those pieces. We then have the second Moran and a Gator pilot. Now, the Gator pilot is doing two things. Firstly, it is justifying the list name. But secondly, we have cut and scraped and crimped just to get everything that we have in the list already. We can't afford an engineer. And because we can't afford an engineer, I want some kind of ability to recover the geckos. And by taking an 11-point Gator pilot, not only do you get just a generally solid, useful piece for 11 points, but he boosts the gizmo kit roll on the geckos and has a gizmo kit. Actually, no, he doesn't. I'm an idiot. And I have made the same mistake that everyone seems to make when they look at pilots, which is look at the fact that they have the Gizmo Kit plus X rule. It is the 12-point pilot that has access to a Gizmo kit, which I didn't take in this list. Okay, if you're looking to play this list for yourself, I strongly recommend trying to find 1 point somewhere, which you can do by cutting the Mark 12 Gecko down into a multi-marksman rifle Gecko, which is fine. That's a perfectly serviceable. In fact, in many respects, that's a solid trade. I took one of each profile because it's nice to have the versatility, but you don't need that. There you go. Take 2 multi-marksman Geckos and turn that into the version of the pilot that does have the Gizmo kit, and my logic stands. Didn't come up this game, but I would have been really embarrassed if it did. Anyway, so that is the jurisdictional command of Corregidor list that we're playing today. It is definitely built with evacuation in mind, but I think more accurately, I would say that the faction was chosen with evacuation in mind. A lot of just little incremental advantages that you get by playing Corregidor add up in evacuation, which makes it a great fit for the mission. So I didn't really have to stretch the faction too far to play evacuation, which meant I could fit in this particular case, the Gecko Harris, and meet the channel supporter request. Now, today we're going to be playing against my good friend Aaron, who is going to be dabbling with JSA Oban. I think Aaron has played 1 or 2 games with Oban previously, but they're just one of the factions that he's looking into at the moment. And you may look at this list and go, this list looks terrible for evacuation. There are very few pieces that you can actually evacuate. You can civ evac with only a small number of the things in this list. That's true. In particular, models with Impetuous cannot civ evac pieces, which means that the Karoshi Rider, for example, the Arigoto, the Yanyans, none of those can actually pick civilians up. We're going to quietly ignore that, because that is a piece of information that is nested all the way in a single ITS rule that only really applies to one particular scenario, evacuation, in any great depth, and Aaron just missed that when he was writing the list. And we were deploying everything, and he was actually playing out one of his turns before I was like, I don't think you can civ evac, and it's not worth going back and adjusting things. We just played it as though you can. So all of Aaron's list, we played it as though if it was Impetuous, don't worry about it, it can civ evac. Obviously, it is going to have an impact on the game, but it was the only way to continue the game and have a good time and have a good evening. We weren't at an event. This is a Wednesday night regular game evening at the LGS. We're not playing for sheep stations, and it was just a better time to play on. So, ignoring the fact that there are a large number of impetuous pieces in this list that can't normally civ evac, pretend that they can, and we'll go through what we're playing with here. The first in combat group, so this is a fairly even, this is an 8-7 split, which is intending to be able to make use of either a lot of orders or high mobility or both to try and get the most out of 2 combat groups. So in the first combat group, we have a full 5-person Keisotsu Corps, the Keisotsu Lieutenant Decoy, a hacker, the exceptional Keisotsu hacker, right? This is just a fantastic piece for 16 points, and the Keisotsu Thunderbolt ballistic skill attack -3, again, a piece that in absolute terms is not that powerful, but for 12 points, fantastic. We then have Yuriko Oda, because there are multiple pieces in this list that you might try and recover with an engineer. She is the most expensive element in this particular link. You could potentially cut her into something like, for example, a Keisotsu hacker and have plenty of points spare, but she's doing something kind of useful in this list, not least of which is being a specialist with higher willpower than 12. Now, Although the Kesotsu link will, and it can move out and it can do things, and it will do so in this particular game, much of the time it'll probably be static for at least some of the game, and those orders will be spent on a couple of other pieces. The first is a Yanyan, one of two. Yanyans are good. If you need to launch a disposable assault, etc., it's a piece that can do it. The second is a Karakuri duo. Now, I feel like any person who plays any faction that has access to Karakuri at any point over history has at some point they've sat down and they've played a game with one or more Karakuri, and they have come away from that with one of two possible opinions. The first possible opinion is, wow, I love Karakuri, they're so cool, and the second is, I hate Karakuri, why did I spend so many points on this? I personally fall into the second category, and after this game so does Aaron. However, if you wish to be, if you find yourself either experimenting with them or you are in the camp of the dedicated Karakuri enjoyers, the fact that they can duo in N5 makes them about as efficient as they have ever been. Now, this two-person duo does clock in at 69 nice points, which is a considerable impost on a list, although it is ultimately affordable. But for those points, you get 6 vitality worth, or 6 structure worth of wounds, whatever, and you get 2 serviceable gunfighters. They're not high ballistic skill, but they do have a good weapon mix, the combination of chain rifles and Panzerfaust, and then a different weapon of some type each. We've got an emitter and a Mark 12. And of course, with that huge structure pool and access to immunity enhanced, they really are tough as guts. They're just very difficult to punch through. Even with like good conventional weapons, it just tends to take time. I personally don't like them because they just suck at winning face-to-face rolls. They are in lap of the gods in terms of their ability to win a face-to-face roll. The best that can be said for them is that they have enough wounds that you can either force those face-to-face rolls through in your active turn or force your opponent to take multiple fights against them in reactive, which gives them a lot of opportunity to get lucky, either with an emitter or with a Panzerfaust or even just with the Mark 12. Attacking into Karakuri can be very annoying for this reason, but that's kind of their sole benefit for me. They are otherwise not fast, they're not order efficient, they're not particularly good at many missions. This is a rare exception, right? Forward observers in Evacuation are pretty good, but otherwise I am not personally a Karakuri enjoyer, and again, after this game, neither is Aaron. Still, that's a very functional combat group, and then in Combat Group 2, we have a link that I do really like. This is a Haris team of the Kuroshi Rider and Aragoto and the Rushi. Now, this link has duo bonuses because the Kuroshi Rider counts as an Aragoto. The Aragoto is incredibly cheap, kind of disposable assault. You get in one link a specialist and close assault. The Kuroshi Rider, she's not fantastic, but she's good enough at close combat, particularly if you get gang up bonuses. She's a very fast, high willpower specialist. Now, normally in Evacuation, the fact that she's impetuous means she can't really interact with the mission particularly much at all. But ignoring that, she's a willpower 14 specialist who, in this scenario, we are playing as having specialist bonuses because she is a forward observer. You also have, in the one link team, the combination of a linked ballistic skill 12 smoke grenade launcher and a Spitfire with an MSV2. So it's just this really nice self-contained link where nothing in the link costs particularly much. The entire link cups in at 62 points for 3 models, and if you lose any individual piece, all of them fight independently. Like the Rushi is a repeater, the Kuroshi Rider and the Aragoto can both bud off if they need to. This is a Haris team that I really like in JSA Oban. We then have a Ryuken surprise attack camouflage heavy rocket launcher, 23 points. Ultimately, these things are cheap and annoying and a little bit scary. They have mine layer, they have very good mimetism, they have decoy. Their ballistic skill is not crash hot, but it doesn't need to be. It's the threat that they project that is the main thing. We've then got a Doctor with a Yazao, a Shikami, love me Shikami, hypermobile, super cool, fantastic close assault, particularly because of the presence of eclipse grenades, and they can even gunfight kind of reasonably thanks to their very high mimetism and okay ballistic skill, and then another Yarn Gun. So this list overall, it is pushing aggressively with these groups. I'm going to end up stripping one group from each order, and although Aaron will have a first turn that is serviceable, it's not easy to attack when you're running, like 6 and 7 orders in each pool, but it is possible with things like that Kuroshi Aragoto link. I think if we were to revisit this list, we would cut the Karakuri, and that would just immediately open up quite a lot of points that you could do different things with. The rest of the list, I think, is making good progress. If we cut both Karakuri and Yuriko Oda, the list is not hurting hugely. The Rushi doesn't have an engineer then, but that's not the end of the world. And at that point, you've got a lot of points that could be spent on things like, for example, a tag or some of the very scary ninjas. All sorts of different things can go into the list at that point. Still, this is the list that we would play against this evening in Evacuation, and let's jump into the game. Now, in this game, in this scenario, I very much wanted to go first, which means that I did not go first. I think I need a flowchart that basically says, is the scenario roll for Lieutenant roll important? If yes, you will fail. If no, we'll see. But as much as I wanted to go first because I felt like I could get a lot of runs on the board in Evacuation going first, if I had that opportunity, one of the very nice things about, for example, multiple Masai Morans is that they do make for very nice defense. Aaron won the roll, Snap picked first turn. I elected to deploy on the right side of the table, mostly just there were a few firing positions that I felt were a little bit nicer. It was a little bit safer to deploy different things. And in particular, it had a couple of nooks from my HVTs that would be easier for me to hide them in, and so Aaron is deploying on the right. He spent his command token to reserve an extra troop, which he would use to reserve drop his Karakuri duo. And with the number of points and SWC off the board, I would be having conniptions about that. He would also keep one Yan Yan in airborne deployment, which meant that by the time his deployment was finished, he had 14 troops visible, which again, playing against JSA Oban, that gives me like literal Night Terror flashbacks because I learned to play Infinity playing against a JSA triple Oniwaban style enjoyer. Those were my first games of Infinity, and I have formative and horrifying memories of those times. And so great respect is put on the possible threat of things like Oniwaban, even though I knew I was at least somewhat safe because Aaron did not make any infiltration rolls. So in terms of deployment, Aaron is fairly easy to lay out. The big Yuriko Odo and Karakuri, and not Karakuri, and Kasotsu core is all camped out in and around this building. Yuriko has laid a mine to help defend against any potential close assault, and the Thunderbolt is standing up on a row, although it will end up sitting down at the end of the first turn because it's aware of the threat posed by the intruder. The Aragoto Biker Rushi Haris team is nestled in behind this pair of crates. Now, the only way they will be able to come out is this direction, but they are very, very fast, so that's not really a problem for them at all, and they're nice and safe there. If they don't spend up any, end up spending any orders on the first turn, they're totally okay. They can stay there until second, or they can hair out and go and accomplish some mission objectives. Now, the Ryukin, its mine, and its decoy are positioned quite centrally. The decoy, which I'm not convinced, I don't read this, but I'm prepared to try and bait them out. But the decoy / real one, the decoy is going to be on this crate here. The reason why I end up thinking that it's the decoy probably is just that it's a little bit exposed to plunging fire, whereas it is a safer position down here behind a ladder, which is what will end up being the actual real Ryukin, and its mine is deployed here. So there's 2 deployment zone mines in this list. That's quite nice. Won't end up coming up in this scenario, but it is something you take advantage of. We then have the only deployed Yan Yan over here, and the 2 Karakuri will drop down as reserve drops near it. Now, for my part, I am spread like way out. Oh, Aaron's HVTs. One is here, and one is here. Kind of on the midfield, he thought they had to be a little bit further than they did. This one is a good position, but the other one back here should absolutely be further back. Now, my deployment is very spread out. I am aware of the fact that there are 2 JSA Oban reserve drops incoming, and I cannot see enough of a full army, and I can't see much SWC. So I have to account for the possibility of things like potentially a tag, or scarier, a pair of ninja infiltrators, Oniwaban, etc. Now, I'm not going to end up facing those, it will be the Karakuri, but I try and split my force up a little bit so that they are, 1, mutually covering each other, but 2, just a little bit difficult to really gut my army in one go. So from top to bottom, we have a repeater bot. Importantly, its repeater area is covering the first of this HVT, or this civilian rather, down here. You can do that from your deployment zone in this scenario because they're only 16 inches up. The lieutenant Alguacile is down here. This is nominally a little bit accessible, but the thing about Evacuation is it's colossally order intensive. It's not easy to attack your opponent's deployment zone. The other Alguacile will be down here. The reason why it's not the lieutenant is that it's kind of in the cookie jar. If something really blitzes passes through and takes out these two geckos, I don't also want it being able to put me in loss of lieutenant. So although it's slightly easy for this one to be attacked, I broadly consider it to be relatively safe in this scenario, just because it's so much effort to actually do evacuation. On ground floor and on the second floor of these buildings here is the Jaguar duo, helping out with the intruder who is on this rooftop. This is a really nice position. If I stand up, I will have access to not the whole table. There's plenty of high ground in the midfield that keeps me from seeing everything, but quite a lot of the table that I might want to shoot, I can potentially draw a bead on by moving left and right through these buildings, which is part of why I picked this deployment zone. Jazz is hanging out on these stairs here, nice and safe. The stairs have got really high rampart, so she's quite safe there. The Gecko, Haris team, and Gromos are hanging out behind these buildings here. The Geckos are in positions where they can take arrow shots. So this Gecko actually has quite a long cross lane shot there. It has a Panzerfaust, I'm willing to take that. And this Gecko is looking down past this building. So I actually have both of the midfield consoles covered, and importantly, each Gecko is also in a position where if they do take fire from something and survive, I can guts them back. This one does not. The blue one, which is the one with the Mark 12, although again, as noted, they should both have multi-marksman rifles if you want to have access to a gizmo kit, because I took the wrong tag pilot. This one does have a guts path back, but it's only a very shallow one. It can guts back into the nook between this large crate and this building. That will get it out of line of sight of any shooting that comes like downfield here, but if my opponent ran all the way up and was shooting from this direction, it wouldn't be able to get to safety. That's just a risk I was willing to take, kind of hoping that it would be sufficient just as a bit of an ARO presence. Otherwise, Billy is hanging out here in this nook behind this crate, also providing nice repeater coverage over one of my two HVTs and one of the other civilians. My other HVT is up and around behind this crate here. So to get access to any of these HVTs is going to be a little bit challenging. There will at least be hacking coverage. We have the first of two Massey Morans. This one is postured quite aggressively, extending its repeater network, firstly over the central console, but then secondly, if this up this approach towards my deployment zone or this approach towards my deployment zone. The crazy koala is deployed back behind it in total cover behind this building. One of the things I like to do with crazy koalas is actually not posture them too aggressively. They've got a really wide trigger area, and what I want to do is I always want to have a situation where my opponent can't dodge against the crazy koala and that be the only thing they have to deal with, because there are lots of models in the game that can either just one, spang a crazy koala, or two, dodge it easily. And it isn't a high impost on my opponent's turn to just spend a short skill doing that. But if the crazy koala threatens to trigger on anything that moves also within the Moran's repeater area, I get multiple arrows, which starts doing things like making stealth infantry uncomfortable, and it helps do things like protect the Morans. Basically, just because you have such a wide trigger area on crazy koalas, I find it worthwhile to pull them back a little bit so that it's the Moran's deployment zone that is projecting out the furthest, and then the koala is doing something like protecting the asset that is the Moran. The second Moran is on this rooftop here, so it is well far back, but it's well far back because I was terrified of the possibility of Superior infiltrating Oniwaban. So I wanted it back, and I wanted its crazy koala back, just defending, because I have a lot of fairly high value pieces that are susceptible to Oniwaban in this area. If an Oniwaban comes into a Gecko, it's going to kill the Gecko. I'm going to chain rifle it twice. It's fine. I will live with that as a possibility. That is the price you pay of Oniwaban getting into that particular cookie jar. But the risk that I was kind of more worried about was that Oniwaban would pick off one piece at a time of these different infantry, the Jaguars, Jazz, and then potentially even the intruder. That's not an easy kill. It's a very difficult kill because it's under camouflage. But the one at a time pac-manning through these pieces, I didn't want it to risk, and so there's just a Moran and a crazy koala pulled further back just as insurance against that. Ultimately, not something that would ever come up, but firstly, Aaron had two reserve drops, and secondly, Aaron had something off the table, that it was a Yan, but I didn't know that. I had to respect the threat, and so I did. So the Moran is pulled back slightly. It's also in a very safe space, or it will be until I do something stupid that gets it killed. And so overall, I think this is a fairly reasonable defense. Now, Aaron is going first. He's not going to take any impetuous because if this Yan leaps out, it's at a little bit of a risk of beginning to run through line of sight of the geckos. And of course, any impetuous orders spent on the bikers will break them out of the Haris team. Now, this is the point where we have to spend a bit of time talking through Aaron's turn. I will strip one order from each of his groups, which leaves him with, because one of the Yan-Yans is off the field, something like 6 orders in each combat group. Now, you can prosecute an offense with 6 orders, but not easily. The amount of time it takes to cross the field is only going to leave you with so much time to do damage. And so I was fairly comfortable about the prospect of surviving an attack. It was really more about denying Aaron the ability to do scenario stuff. But the Rushi team was very fast. And again, we're playing them as though the Impetuous models can sync with civilians in this mission. So just bear that in mind. And so in terms of Aaron's performance this turn, definitely the Rushi team kind of did the best. Oh, by the way, my reserve drop. Bandit hanging out behind this crate. Cool. The Rushi team, the bikes would take real full advantage of the speed, and that speed would allow them to prosecute an attack, or in this case, some scenario play, even through the orders being stripped. But the first combat group of the Karakuri did not have enough. Now, probably the correct play in that instance was to spend maybe one order on the Karakuri, just moving them up and staging them in annoying places, 1 or 2 orders, and then spending all the remaining orders bringing on the Yan-Yan and attacking with Yan-Yan in that combat group. But Aaron kind of committed to, no, we're going to try and do as much of the scenario as we can, and so he ran ahead first into the fact that evacuation always takes way more orders than you think. It is a hugely order-intensive scenario. It's very difficult to play at all efficiently, because you have to firstly cover so much ground, and then there are multiple short skills involved with actually firstly sinking the civilians. So that takes an order, right? It occupies a short skill. Then you have to get them back and evacuate them out through one of the consoles, which takes a short skill. And so it's just very, very time consuming to do all of the movement that is necessary. And that makes the rhythm of how you approach the scenario challenging. Now, what happened was that the Rushi team with the Kosotsu rider, they would move out up in this direction. They had nice safe lines of advance. It wouldn't be until they walked through, one of them had to walk through line of fire after grabbing a civilian, that there would be any risk to them. But this is, even for a team that is this fast, it's going to take orders, right? It's 1 order to move out and around to here, and then 1 order to move up to here, and then 1 order to move up to here. They've spent like 3 orders at this point. So the Rushi and the regular 13-point Aragoto get left behind. The Karoshi rider gets catapulted off. That's important because she has to leave the link. If she doesn't leave the link, you have to break the link in order to civivac, because a model can't perform the civivac skill if it's part of a coordinated order or part of a fire team. So the Karoshi rider leaves the link, grabs this civilian, and then comes herring up and around this way. And because she's so fast, she's able to do this. But even in her circumstances, there are enough orders have had to have been spent. This is time consuming enough that even a piece as quick as her is not able to easily do all of these things. Now, Aaron could have done this more quickly or more efficiently if he'd chosen to grab the nearby civilian. That would have freed up, that would have avoided the need for the Karoshi rider to route all the way past this one. But of course, the advantage of routing past this one is that there is a model that I have hidden behind this crate that is very clearly telegraphed as having scenario intentions. And if he doesn't grab this civilian, it will be easy for my bandit to grab this one, and then run around myself to evacuate 2 civilians, because a model can have 2 models civivac'd at a time. And so he's doing this to deny me the scenario points. It takes 1 more order, and that order is actually eventually going to get the Karoshi rider killed. Because she has to cross through this path, she walks through line of sight of the Panzerfaust, she gets Panzerfausted, she's targeted at this point because she's moved through repeater area, but she does yeet a civilian up into space. Now, from my money, this was only barely worthwhile. The cost of losing her, given her value, is probably not worthwhile on the first turn, particularly because she died without doing any damage. You do need to focus on progressing the scenario every single turn in evacuation, because it is so order intensive. You can't just faff around doing good stuff. You have to be constantly thinking about how you are making space to progress the scenario, developing your board position to progress the scenario, and progressing the scenario, because it is so order intensive. I really, really like that. I like how it forces you to think. It is, because of this, one of the longer term thinking. It's a strategic scenario. But there are some people who don't like it for that reason, and to each their own. Not every scenario is the same. This scenario is one of the more difficult ones to echo. It's not difficult to actually do any individual part of the mission. It's just that there's so much time that's spent doing it that it requires a different kind of focus. I really like it though. Now, that first run with Aaron's Rushi team would probably have been good if he'd had one extra order to lay down some smoke so that the Kuroshi Rider could get through and pass. She copped a Crazy Koala on the way through, which is why he didn't care too much about it. It's like, she's probably going to die to that anyway. She actually spanged the Crazy Koala, but the Panzerfaust took her down. That was the more successful part of the turn. The other part of the turn is that with 6 orders, the Karakuri basically ran up here. And that's about it. That's what the Karakuri did. They're not fast enough to really push an offense. One of them did succeed. There's a face-to-face roll with the Gecko, which ended up actually after a couple of rounds putting a wound on the Gecko. But even with a Mark 12, the Karakuri is it's just going to take a really long time to chew through an Armor 6 tag. And Aaron did not move up to engage with the emitter because I had Speedball. We both agreed that we'd both spend a command token to call down Speedball. And as long as I have Speedball as yet undeployed, the emitter is just going to get cancelled by switch on at some point. The worst case for me is I have to spend another command token to reform the link because this is, of course, the link leader. So he takes some face-to-face rolls with the Mark 12, does a wound, it takes ages. He pulls back and he does the first of his 2 classifieds. He forward observes my HVT over here, which he's able to do from position on the stairs, away from the Gecko, and that is actually a good thing to have accomplished this turn. If you can do your classifieds on turn 1, that's a really nice way to, like if you move some pieces forward, you claim some board space, and you do a little bit of damage to your opponent, and you do a classified, that is one of the ways that you might choose to approach this scenario because every point matters. There is no blowout point swing in evacuation. There's no points for having evacuated more civilians, for example. So every single point tends to matter. And if you can do both of your classifieds, they're actually some of the easiest ways to score points in this game. Like it is often going to be easier to score a classified than it is to evacuate one of the regular civilians. And so with that in mind, I would say that Aaron electing to forward observe one of my HVTs with the Karakuri was a good use of them. Although he could also have just done that with the Kuroshi Rider. Once again, kind of suggesting that the Karakuri are a little bit superfluous. Now, if we had been playing, his list would have to have been different if we had been playing that Impetuous models or his Impetuous models couldn't Civ evac, but the whole list would be rebuilt at that point, so it's kind of moot. Now, with this, I roll into my first turn, and everything is intact. All of my models are alive, and that's fantastic. This gives us effectively 17 orders to play with in order to try and accomplish the scenario, although it should be worth noted that everything I said about fire teams and how they can be difficult to progress this scenario with applies to the Gecko Haris. I'm going to have to break the Haris in order to do anything with them that progresses this scenario, and it'll mostly be getting Valeria Gromos up the board and pulling her back. Frankly, I have better models that I will probably try and do scenario with, although she's going to matter quite a bit by the end of the game. So, what we do just to begin with is spend tactical awareness orders with the Gecko. We'll call down two different speedballs, and both of them will end up being auto repair kits, and so each Gecko will get an auto repair kit. Frankly, should probably have either left it or had one of them be switched on. That's going to matter later. But my main concern was just not forgetting to cool down switch on, and there's only one model in Aaron's list with electromagnetic, and that is the EM Karakuri. So I'm like, you know what, it's fine, I'll just engage that at a good range, we'll just fight the thing later at some juncture, we're gonna push on and progress. And so what I do as the first couple of orders with my turn is just spend tactical awareness orders. Now, this is not technically sensible or even hugely tactically relevant. The reason why I am doing this is basically just to give myself thinking time and to see what develops. This is not, in the strictest sense, a good habit. Just spending orders to see what goes on so that you can see how the shape of the turn begins to play out is, in the strictest sense, a bad habit. However, it has one small piece of merit, particularly if you're doing things like spending impetuous orders or tactical awareness orders that are not going to hugely affect the other, like the flexible resources, right? If you spend your fixed resources, not your flexible resources, you're not hugely impacting your ability to play out the turn. And so if I am not 100% sure about what to do, and this is like my first game with Corregidor in N5, I think. It's one of my first games with Corregidor in ages. I'm not familiar with the faction. One of the things that you can do is just do something to see how the game state develops so you can begin to get a better idea of what you should do. It's a combination of thinking time and trying to tease reaction out from your opponent, because your opponent will react usually to you spending those orders. They will do things, and it can help just give you some clarity about how you might pursue the turn. Now, obviously, the optimal way to play a turn is to think about every order that you have to spend and only spend orders in pursuit of some particular objective or some particular plan in mind. However, at a local game store game, we don't want to spend 4 hours playing the game, and in an event, you can't spend 4 hours playing the game. And so, kind of as a way to keep the turn moving and for things to keep happening, and to give your opponent a chance to show their hand with some respects, and just to see some developments occur that can help give you an idea of how you should then progress the game state. If you're in a situation where you aren't sure what else to do and you're just going to do something because you have to because there's only 2 hours to play, then at least spending your fixed resources first can be a good way to open a turn. I used to really like doing this with impetuous activations, particularly back when they were mandatory, because it would give me some sense of the shape of the turn, and doing things like spending tactical awareness orders is a good way of doing the same thing in N5. So all of this is a really long way of saying, on my first turn, I wasn't sure exactly what to do because I was remembering how to play Evacuation, so I faffed around with the Gecko order, the Gecko team for a couple of orders. But that faffing around was like, okay, cool, we're going to pick up our auto repair kits, we're going to fight the Karakuris a little bit, we'll do some damage to one of them, but not quite that much, whatever, okay, cool, nothing really very much happened, pull back to where we were, cool, that was a tactical awareness order spent, another tactical awareness order spent, okay, sweet, Okay, I've had some time to think now, and I've remembered that I have an intruder. So, the intruder is going to activate, and we're going to take a little bit of a risk. We're not going to spend time just yet throwing Jaguar Smoke, because, as a reminder, this is an incredibly order-intensive scenario, and I'm going to need every spare order that I have in the first combat group for a plan I will later pursue. So, the intruder is just going to stand up. From where it's at, it can't see any of the stuff around here, but it could have seen the Thunderbolt if it was still standing. If it had been standing, actually, I might have thrown smoke, but there's actually not a lot of, because of the lines of fire, right? I can see down this rooftop to here, which will let me see the Karakuri, not the one on the stairs, but it will let me see the Karakuri that Aaron is positioned on the rooftop. It will let me see the Thunderbolt. I would have probably engaged the Thunderbolt. I can't smoke shoot, but I can surprise this model. The reason why I would throw smoke in this particular case, I would probably get smoke around to here, because I don't want the Karakuri being able to Panzerfaust me for free. In this case, just had one Karakuri, could have smoke shot, but the odds against the Karakuri are so rough with surprise that I'm just like, I don't need to at the moment. It's fine. HMG goes down and inflicts 2 wounds on the Karakuri, which drops prone behind these barrels. Now, this is one of the things that Karakuri will often do. It's very hard to put them all the way to dead in one order because of immunity enhanced and all of their structure, but it's sitting the hell down now, and doing that in 2 orders effectively, 1 tag order and 1 intruder order, that's fine. It's sitting down, go away. Now, what I then do with the intruder is I take a risk. Now, I can, if I move out and around to here and lean out slightly, I can see the Karakuri that Aaron has down here on this like these stairwells. There's a line basically down past the edge of this building, over these stairs, because these are stairs here, so that's actually a diagonal that I can see past, that lets me get a shot on the emitter Karakuri, which I would also like to damage. Now, I could have thrown some smoke down. I could have thrown a couple of different pieces of smoke down, potentially, that would have required spending maybe 2 orders with the Jaguar. I decide not to, because I'm still an intruder, I have mimetism, I have cover, and what I'm looking to do is to see if I can bait out the Ryukin, because if I can bait out the Ryukin, I have a very good face-to-face roll against it. I have an MSV2 and mimetism. I completely ignore its mimetism 6. Right, I want to try and bait it out so I can deal with it. And so what I do is I move the intruder within 2 inches of this Masai Moran, on the grounds that that makes it pretty likely that Aaron will reveal and try and take the shot, even though he needs 9s to hit with the Ryukin, because I believe it's ballistic skill 12. 9s or 10s, but I'm going to assume 9s. Because he needs 9s to hit, it's only 45% chance to hit, and even if he does hit, the Moran then has an okay chance of passing the save. So does the intruder, right? Okay chance of passing the save. What I'm more concerned about is that the Moran might get hit by the rocket blast. The intruder has a good chance of winning the face-to-face roll. Cool. So we're going to move the intruder around. We're going to tempt Aaron to reveal the Ryukin, and the Ryukin reveals. It's the one on ground level. It responds with a rocket into the intruder. We get Panzerfaust from the Karakuri, and so I split burst 2 and 2. Now, in good news, I hit the Karakuri and I do, I think, a wound to it. And in bad news, I roll an 18 and a 19 to hit the Ryukin. It rolls a 7 and it kills both the Intruder and the Masai Moran. And so, the consequence of me baiting the Ryukin out with the prospect of potentially killing 50 points of my models, how tasty, how tempting, how could he possibly resist, has resulted in him killing more than 50 points of my models. So yeah, this was a big me when I find the person responsible for all of the problems that I'm in kind of moment. Now, was this a terrible risk that I took that materialized? Kind of yes. Was it something that I should not have done? Kind of hard to say. I did skip over this, but I have moved this Masai Moran around and Oblivioned this Karakuri, so it was only single dice from the Karakuri back. Like, it felt like it was worth the risk, but on the other hand, I have just lost my only firepower piece with a meaningful range beyond 32 inches, and which would have kept Aaron honest all game. So, pros and cons here, if we're being realistic, and this particularly, I think, becomes a bad idea in retrospect when we look at what this Ryukin could say. Aaron and actually I both kind of thought it had a bit more line of fire than it did, but it's pretty constrained. It can't actually see all that much because it's nooked in behind a ladder, and it's just not actually got the best line of fire. So I kind of took a risk here that got two of my most important pieces killed for nothing, and maybe I shouldn't have done it. The reason why I did it, right, why I didn't just throw smoke down was because obviously if I threw smoke down, it wouldn't be able to react at all. I could have thrown smoke down in the way of the Karakuri. That would still have baited the same response, because then I could have put 4 dice into the Ryukin. If I'd done that, he might not have gone for it, but if he hadn't gone for it, would have that been the end of the world? I didn't do any of those things because I thought I would need 10 orders on the Bandit, or 9 orders on the Bandit. And sure enough, I needed 9 orders on the Bandit. It is, however, going to do some pretty incredible stuff. Like, everything that's happened so far has been Gecko Tackaware orders and Combat Group 2 orders, because the Intruder is a Group 2 fire support piece. And that means the Bandit has pretty free reign to come out and around. Now, as a reminder, the Rushi and Aragoto are hanging out in this space, and nothing is watching the approach apart from them. So the Bandit is going to come out and around. And at this point, Aaron basically recognizes that if he does nothing, I am going to just be able to walk through into the back arc of the Aragoto. So what he does is he breaks the link and he declares dodge on the Aragoto and discover on the Rushi. No problem. Whoop, Bandit rips out its boarding pistol and fires a burst 2 boarding pistol template into the two of them. Do you know Bandits have +1 attack ballistic, like +1 ballistic skill, like +1 burst? That's incredible. They are so good. Like, 25 points for these things is awesome. Plus infiltration reroll, plus this one is a specialist, plus it's good in melee. Anyway, boom, burst 2 comes down. The Aragoto fails its dodge because it's a surprise attack with the boarding pistol, but it spangs both attacks. However, the Rushi fails one and goes unconscious. Okay, that's fine. 2 damage 7 hits into the Aragoto. It had a pretty good chance of putting it down, but also it could have passed its dodge. Into close combat with the Aragoto we go. Now, this is a good chance that the Bandit will die, because the Aragoto has a boarding pistol itself, but if I can put this down, I start to really hamper Aaron's order pools and limit his ability to play the remainder of the game. And I could just pass the save. And I do. I pass my save against his boarding pistol, and the Bandit puts the Aragoto down in close combat. Sweet. That's been 3 orders, or like 1, 2, 3. Yep. So we've now got some more stuff to do. We're going to swing past this HVT and grab it. That takes 2 orders. I failed the first time because willpower 12. It's 15s to roll. That can happen. Boom, boom, 2 more orders, and then out and around, and around. Get into base contact with this console and whoop, yeet the HVT into space. And this is an enemy HVT, which means it's worth 2 points. And at this juncture, I think I have a single order left in this combat group, which we're just going to use to run the Bandit around here in a position where it's nice and hidden. And cool. Game state is now in our favor. We've extracted one of the more valuable HVTs. Technically, at this point, the score is 2-all. Aaron has done 1 classified, and I have done and he's extracted a HVT, and I have done a 2-point HVT. So the game state is even, but I'm sort of up on attrition, but only kind of sort of. I've killed a 3-person Haris team, but I've not actually done terribly much to the Karakuri. I've wounded one, I've isolated one, they're still kind of there and functional, so the remaining thing that we do is we just move Billy forward. We lay an EM mine. Now, I don't believe an EM mine does anything to immunity enhanced, but if the Shikami comes forward and gets fresh, Shikami, by the way, is hanging out behind this big building here, this big billboard, the EM mine might be relevant there, but mostly we're moving forward the repeater just so we can mess with the Karakuri. And so we can see at the end of this turn, Billy has moved forward. We can see the Karakuri team hanging out in this building here. We can see how the tags, using their 2 tactical awareness orders, and I think maybe 1 regular order, have positioned to take more aggressive ARO pieces, because at this juncture, it's kind of clear that there could still be, there's something, I've only seen 14 of Aaron's troops at this stage, but it's kind of clear that there aren't enough guns to contest the tag, so I move them up into aggressive ARO pieces, and we can see the unconscious Rushi behind this billboard over here, with the bandit having moved around. So Aaron begins his second turn in a kind of a really challenging position, because his forward deployed, like pieces he's managed to get forward, are not in a situation where they can do much with the scenario. There's just too much hacking around. It's too much of a pain for Karakuri to progress. And the pieces he's got that would be really good at progressing the scenario, in particular things like the Shikami, they haven't developed their board state. They aren't any further forward, which means that it's going to be order intensive. And so he kind of has to just use this. He recognizes, and correctly recognizes, that he basically has to use this turn for setup, but that's what he does. The bulk of the turn is going to be spent getting this link team down and forward. Now, they won't be able to pick up any HVTs, but they can get forward. The Thunderbolt can move into position where it can take some AROs. The Hacker gets forward and places some crazy koalas where they will be annoying to the Bandit. And Yuriko Oda in particular, she's going to end up back here in a position where she can potentially make a run with 2 HVTs on her way to the beacon, which can be a really big coup. And to help facilitate that, Aaron brings on his second Yan Yan. I kind of breathe a sigh of relief at this point, because it's like, okay, that's the 15th trooper. There's no Aniwaban, there's no ninja, we're good. And the Yan Yan moves around to here. On its way past, it picks up my HVT. Yes, it's impetuous, please ignore that. And it's going to end up it doesn't spend many orders. It uses it irregular to arrive, and then one regular order just to get out and around. I think it's 2 regular orders. It will end up here, at which point it will voluntarily cease the HVT Civivac state. That's kind of how you do it. We had to go through and refresh ourselves and read the rules on Civivac. You can't take a civilian from someone anymore. One of the conditions of not being able to do Civivac is that it can't be a civilian in the Civivac state. But you can end Civivac at any time, basically. So the Yan Yan moves around and drops the civilian off, which sets Aaron up to have 1 civilian here and 1 civilian here, and a nice clear path with Yuriko Oda up and around. Now, he can't do that this turn, does not have the orders, but it sets up a potential big play on turn 3. Otherwise, he's going to move this Yan Yan out and around, just staging it behind this crate to be annoying next turn, and he's going to try and accomplish some stuff with the Karakuri. And this is going to be one of those, I hate Karakuri, and I do too, Aaron, I do too. They are going to be able to successfully get out away from Billy and cop some hacking attacks, but it's actually going to I think it just spranged all of the hacking arrows that I put into it. No, it got immobilized, but on the way away from Billy, it successfully did Vigilance. It had 1 go to do that. It got immobilized in the process. I attempted to Carbonite and Oblivion it. I missed the Oblivion, hit the Carbonite. It got immobilized, but it did Vigilance. It was a heavy infantry and zone of control of Billy, and that's significant, because it means that Aaron has done 2 classifieds and extracted a civilian, which just helps him. Again, you have to keep progressing the scenario as much as possible in evacuation, and so that was a sensible thing to do. Now, that is the bulk of what can be accomplished this turn, because he's bled out that Haris team. He's ultimately got some order constraints, but he does have the orders to activate the Ryukin, pop up this ladder and around into cover back here, and along the way take a face-to-face roll with the Gecko, where in the process it wounds the Gecko, but the Gecko recovers that with the auto repair kit. The only other thing I think that's particularly notable is that during her turn, Gromos was able to, on one of the last orders of the game, drop a pitcher down here, which is just killed by the Thunderbolt on the Kosotsu team. I'm fine with that, because any orders that I can force Aaron to spend that isn't progressing the mission is good. So we roll into my second turn, and Aaron now has an aggressively developed board state. Okay, we have to respond to that, and to the extent that we can, try and accomplish the mission. This would be easier if I hadn't thrown away the intruder trying to engage the Ryukin on my previous turn, which means it's just Geckos to do some shooting. And I would describe my approach to this turn not necessarily as amateurish, but it's the kind of thing you have to actually think very critically about. One of the most common ways to approach a turn, for example, if you are a Pan-Oceanian player, you will often begin by thinking this way, is my opponent is looking at me, and my opponent has a gun. I have a gun, and in Infinity, active turn favors the aggressor. I'd better activate and shoot that model. And I basically attempted to go on a bit of a shooting spree. Now, things did not go too badly to begin with. I engaged the Ryukin with the Gecko. This is not a great face-to-face roll, by the way. Four dice on 7s versus 1 dice on 12s is fine, but it's the kind of thing that you can expect to take a few goes to resolve, because what you're basically waiting for is sooner or later the Ryukin will miss, and if you land 1 or 2 shots during that time, you're golden. Now, as it happened, the Ryukin missed his first ARO. I landed 2 hits on him with a damage 3 Mark 12, and dunk 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 down he went. Okay, cool, no problem. Let's progress. Let's move forward. We are moving the Geckos forward. Why are we doing this? Because the tactical awareness orders are burning a hole in my pocket. Is that the most sensible thing to do? Well, it was fine on turn 1, but maybe we should have thought about this a little bit more. Still, they're going to move up and forward. They're going to occupy this space around here. And what they're going to be looking to do is, 1, set up a more aggressive ARO cordon, 2, kill some Thunderbolt kind of pieces, etc. Generally, if possible, put Aaron as hard down as I can so that he can't progress the mission all on the final turn. This is going to go partially okay. The bad thing that's going to happen is that a Gecko is going to come out and around here. It's going to have a nice engagement against this Kasotsu with the emitter. It's inside 16 inches, which means the emitter is in 0 range band. I'm in cover, so the Karakuri is isolated. It's a single dice hitting on 10s. I have 4 dice hitting on 13s. I will roll 16, 17, 18, 19. The Karakuri will roll an 8, and I will be isolated and immobilized. Dang. And particularly dang, because that didn't need to happen. I had a solution that would have made this totally risk-free. And that's what I would end up doing with the orders in Group 2 anyway, which is that I would spend 1 order in Group 2 to move Billy around and forward. Then I would activate Jazz and just try and hack the Karakuri. And I would immobilize it. And an immobilized Karakuri is very easy to shoot over a couple of orders. Worst case scenario, it does break free with that order. I still miss everything. And I get 1 more attempt to shoot it, or I oblivion it again. I didn't do any of those things. I just took the gunfight first without setting up victorious preconditions beforehand, without making things advantageous, because it was potentially more order efficient. But that was a mistake, because Group 3 at this point is down to, Group 2 is down to 3 orders, right? Because the Intruder and Moran in that group both went up in a bonfire thanks to the Ryukin rocket. I only had 3 orders, and since I only had 3 orders, those effectively became a constrained order pool, right? Those are very fixed. There's a limit to what I can do with those. The good thing I can do with them is move Billy and then make some hacking attacks. I should probably have done that early, because it would have set up the Gecko for a really nice face-to-face roll with an isolated mobilize, right? It's resetting on 1s. It's a free kill. I just need to put the orders into killing it with the Gecko. Instead, I let it fight me back on a 10, and things were far easier for it than it needed to be. Because of that, the Gecko got isolated and mobilized, which is going to make my final turn much more difficult. And this is the kind of mistake that you make when it's your first game with a faction literally in the edition, and in fact the first game for ages, right? I'm not a Corregidor player. These are mistakes that will be made, but it's good to identify them in retrospect. Now, the rest of the turn does not go particularly terribly. The other Gecko still has it's got the multi-marksman rifle. It moves out and around, and it goes brr brr brr, and after a few engagements, it will put the Thunderbolt down. I'm hitting on, I think, 10s because of the BS attack -3, but the Thunderbolt can't really hurt a Gecko particularly effectively. I think it actually puts a wound on me, and the auto repair kit triggers, but with the auto repair kit, I'm effectively a 4 wound pace, right? The Thunderbolt is not putting me down. I put it down. Excellent. The game state is now freed up for me to begin trying to aggress. And because I've been trying to be very order efficient, right? I am foolishly order efficient in this case, because the orders in Group 2 were not going to be spent any other way, but we finally do the thing, we finally immobilize this, and then, with the orders that we have remaining in Group 1, the Masai Moran is going to come out and around. And just barely, it's going to have enough orders to come down, shotgun this Karakuri to death, because it turns out that models can only reset against you on a 1 while your ballistic skill attacking them are pretty easy to kill. Boy, it sure would have been nice if I'd done that with the Gecko earlier. Up and around, grab this HVT, and then back, and it's going to have just barely enough orders to grab the HVT first attempt, run back to here, cross over the button, hang out behind this barricade, and yeet the HVT into space. And so at this point, I have done no classifieds. However, I've evacuated both of the 2-point HVTs, which puts me on 4 points and Aaron on 3, because he's done 2 classifieds and gotten 1 regular HVT. Now, that's a pretty good game state for me, but it is not it's not in the bag, not by any stretch of the imagination. Aaron still has some pieces left. He has pieces like the Shikami, etc. He is in with a chip and a chair. Now I'm going to mention this is the beginning of his final turn. I mentioned that my combat group 2 orders with the the 3 orders that I had. The first one was to move Billy forward, and you can see Billy up against this building here. The second was to successfully carbonite the Karakuri over here. Okay, excellent, cool. I still have 1 order left, and I had that 1 order sitting there burning a hole in my pocket at the end of the turn. What I chose to do with it, without particular thinking, was move Jazz a bit further forward, hanging out behind this this barricade here, on the grounds that I might want her to do Net Undermine, which is one of my 2 classifieds, later in the game. That is not necessarily a bad call. However, you will recall that there is a Shikami standing up here, and my Masai Moran, on the way to do the objective, has ended up here, which means that the Shikami, the only piece realistically left in Aaron's entire army that has a good chance of doing the mission, is in a hacking area. And I had a spare order. Now, it wouldn't necessarily have been successful, but Aaron hasn't called down his speedballs at this point. And if I was to successfully, even just carbonite, if I was to successfully carbonite the Shikami, holy hell, that screws with his entire turn. But I didn't do it. I just didn't think of it. Like, right there, the Masai Moran was right there. I could have made the hacking attack, but I was focused on the Moran as a piece that is doing mission stuff right now, and I didn't think about the fact that it's a specialist. Again, these are the little mistakes that it's very easy to make when you are learning a faction. Now, had I successfully carbonated carbonated the Shikami, the game is very close to, it's in a rough position for Aaron, but he has just enough orders to potentially do some stuff this turn. So there are a few things that are going to play out. The first is he is going to do the play that he tried to set up last turn. Now, what he does decide is we have this situation up on this top corner here with the HVTs. We have the Yanya that is dropped off a HVT here, and we have the regular civilian here. Aaron no longer has enough orders to move Yuriko, Civivac, move Yuriko, Civivac, move around, and evacuate. There just are not enough orders in that group, so he reprioritizes, does the sensible thing. There is a hacker hanging out back here. Oh, by the way, both of the crazy koalas were successfully dodged by the Gecko that moved up to kill the Thunderbolt, thanks to Tagcom. Hooray, the rule did something. It often does, actually. The hacker moves back, grabs this civilian, moves around. Smoke comes down from the Yan Yan using its impetuous order as it runs forward in this direction. Smoke comes down, and the hacker, with 2 attempts on whip 12, successfully evacuates my HVT for 2 points into space. Now, since he has the irregular and the impetuous order spare, the Yan Yan threw Smoke with the impetuous order, and then comes around and kills Jazz with its irregular. That didn't need to happen. If only I hadn't progressively pushed Jazz forward like that, where she didn't need to be. Again, a mistake, and it is something that it would cost me, and it didn't have to. Now, that is 2 points for Aaron, which pushes him up to 5. He's evacuated 1 regular civilian, 1 HVT for 2, and done 2 classifieds. That is already just a solid point. Like, this is not a high-scoring scenario. 5 points might be difficult for me to exceed. He might at least get the tie there. However, he could potentially get 1 more civilian. Had I carbonated the Shikami, this would probably have been impossible. But because I haven't, the Shikami can move. Because it can move, it can pick up a speedball. So the speedball with switch on lands next to the Shikami grabs it and 8-inch jumps over to here. It gets flash pulsed by the Moran along the way, which it just elects to be like, nope, I don't care. Now, if I had not let him e-meta the Gecko, I would probably have been in a position where the Gecko would have been very dangerous to the Shikami. This would have been more difficult again, but none of those things were true. The Shikami comes around, grabs this civilian, and whoop back again. And at this point, the Masai Moran is attempting to flash pulse it. The Yan Yan comes around. There are some engagements. The Moran survives, and the Shikami has to just barrel into basically this objective, trying to exfiltrate the HVT. And what he's going to do is, along the way, he's going to get at least once, I'm going to get a successful hack on him as he tries to make it in close, but he has switch on, and so he'll be fine. And on the way through, he's going to move into close combat with the Gecko, try and palm off the HVT, survive, switch on will trigger, survive the hacking arrows, and try and throw the civilian into space. However, he is just a regular specialist operative, and so he fails the role in this case, leaving him civivac with a civilian and in CC with my Gecko. Now, if he had succeeded that Willpower 13 roll, there is a pretty solid chance that that might have, at that point, at least tied the game for him. I say tied because we are going to do some heroic stuff with Zoe and with Billy. Billy, who is pre-staged on my turn, is going to move up and around. He's going to get into close combat. He's going to have to cut in under and get around, and get into close combat with the Karakuri over here, and he will successfully do, I think it's nano espionage. It's the one where you have to be in base contact with an enemy of a certain troop type, and then make a willpower roll with +3, which he does, and then he runs further across and does not undermine. So good job, Billy. You're a veteran troop because you're a character, which meant he has done 2 classifieds. Now that puts me on 6 points, which would have been sufficient to tie the game, right? If Aaron had successfully extracted the HVT. It would have meant that basically the entire remaining, like all of my remaining turn, would have been trying to find a way to extract either this civilian over here or this civilian over here. Those were the remaining points up for grabs, and it's possible that that could have been done. I had a bandit that might have been able to do that, and I had actually just a bandit, or I had Gromos back here who could have run away, grabbed this, and run around. So the option did exist, although if I hadn't succeeded on both willpower rolls with Billy, one of those two would have had to take up the slack. However, since there was a HVT literally sitting here in base contact with a Shikami, I have a crack at attempting to exfiltrate it. Now, it's connected to a Shikami right now, but a Shikami is hackable, so we use Valyria Gromos to break the evacuation state. However, there is a Yan Yan that has moved forward and is watching with a chain rifle all of that space. And it's going to take a couple of orders in which Gromos is likely to get chain rifled. So, we have to move the Masai Moran. The Masai Moran moves forward, cops the chain rifle, dies, but successfully civivacs and picks up the civilian. And because I don't die until resolution, I place the civilian in base contact with the Moran before I'm removed from the table. And that puts the civilian behind the Gecko, which means that Gromos can then move forward to pick it up without getting chain rifle. Now I think she has to hack the Shikami twice so that it can't dodge into CC with her. But then, having picked the civilian up, she moves forward and around and attempts to hand it off, and she does so. She does so successfully. The Shikami dodges into CC with her, but not before she throws the civilian into space, and I think she actually dies to the chain rifle, but that's fine, which puts the eventual final score at 7-5 my way. Now, that last point ultimately is showboating. It's not particularly important to the scenario score. I did want to see if I could do it. The important thing is getting 5 or more points and winning the game. So, the overall tournament point score, right? Aaron scored 5 points and got within 2 points of me, which is a tasty 2 tournament points in an event, which is as best as you can do from a losing position. And I got offensive bonus, right? Scored 5 or more points and did win the game, which would have scored 4 tournament points. So this would have been a good overall outcome, although, of course, in a tournament game, Aaron's entire list wouldn't have functioned because of all the impetuous pieces, but never mind that. Not particularly important. Now, in terms of the list challenge, the Geckos were pretty cool and interesting. If I'm being perfectly honest, comparing them to a Gator, the Gator is more self-contained, and it is frankly more dangerous in active turn. It's burst 4 and higher ballistic skill and higher armor, and it probably has a little bit more utility in terms of things like it can spend an NCO order, and it's obviously cheaper than the 2 Geckos combined, and it has a mine dispenser. And it fights at longer ranges because it's got a HMG. The big thing that the Geckos have that the Gator doesn't is, one, a higher total wound count, which is significant, right? And 2, the Geckos actually kind of work as ARO pieces at a certain point. Ballistic skill 13 with +1 special die is not a world-beating ARO, but it is something you have to pay attention to because they're packing Panzerfaust or Blitzens. And because they're packing Panzerfaust or Blitzens and, say, DA rounds with the multi-rifles, you can't ignore them. You have to move up a piece to deal with them. And a lot of the pieces that might easily overcome Ballistic Skill 13 with 2 die, things like an Intruder, for example, just are not quickly getting through an Armor 6 3 wound tag. And so the ARO potential, I think you have to be judicious because you can't just throw a Gecko away, right? If it dies, it sucks. It can't go prone. It's got to be carefully positioned. It is too expensive and valuable to be careless with, particularly since if one of them goes down, their active turn firepower is a bit risky. But they can be genuinely difficult to dislodge for many lists and kind of force a hacking response, for example. And you can deal with a hacking response. You've got at least one use of Speedball, possession can be cancelable with command tokens, like etc., etc. Not to mention that Gecko is not hugely dangerous if it gets possessed. Right? The other Gecko is quite good at just dodging and trying not to take any damage at close range. And so that's the value proposition for me. Like, okay, they can cart a specialist around the field. Well, that's not a huge deal. So can a Gator. A Gator can duo, and so if you can wildcard anything into duo with the Gator, you can get sort of the same effect with Valyria Gromos, for example. Although the +1 special die from the Link team benefits Valyria Gromos' pitches quite a lot. So overall, I think I would probably, for general play, probably prefer a Gecko. But we saw some of the strengths of the Gecko. Sorry, I would prefer a Gator, but we saw some of the strengths of the Gecko here. We saw the ARO presence. We saw the fact that there were two of them, and so two of them could lock down the position. Right, I had lines of fire from both. They made for very good ARO pieces. And I think if you want to use Geckos, that's probably one of the things to think about in terms of how you might choose to play them. They have that ability. They are not god tier AROs, but the fact that they can be ARO pieces if you need to, and they can cover quite a lot of angles because there's two of them, and they have those link team bonuses, that adds up to just enough interesting stuff that if you want to play them over something like, for example, a Gator and then some spare points on other stuff, because the Gator is cheaper than the two of them are collectively, you get kind of something interesting there. It's probably not hugely optimal for tournament play, particularly if you are not sure what the tables will be like, because they are pretty heavily gated in active turn to the 24-inch range band. But with all of those caveats, they were pretty cool to play, and they did some pretty cool things. And if I had just done something moderately sensible in terms of neutralizing that Karakuri emitter before engaging it, come the final turn, there would have been almost no way for Aaron to dislodge the second Gecko and still accomplish any of the things that he needed to during his turn. So let's consider this a successful outing. It was an interesting challenge, and thank you very much, Grey Stranger. Firstly, it's been a while since you made the request, but I believe the request was, please just play Corregidor. Also, maybe Gecko Duo. That's the kind of thing that I can work with, because obviously something like, hey, please spend more than 100 points of your list this way is not always something that is easy to practically do. In this case, we could sort of meet the brief by playing a Gecko Haris. I hope you found this interesting. And just as a quick spruik and reminder before we close things out, if you want to support the channel, you can do so via the Buy Me a Coffee description, link in the video description, or by becoming a channel member on YouTube. On top of this, some of you may have noticed that if you go to the live section of the channel, there has been a live stream. This is not something I'm sure I will be able to do particularly often, but it would be really nice to be able to do these maybe once a week, maybe twice a week. I am cognizant that there are many different time zones that my viewers are from. We have people from Australia, we have people from America, we have a surprisingly large number of channel viewers from Germany. And it would be nice to be able to hang out, do some hobby, and chat with all of you at some point. So we'll see. Those will probably continue. We'll try and do more of them in future. Maybe one a week, maybe one a fortnight, just occasionally, but I will advertise them ahead of time. And if you want to come along, hang out, and listen to me talk about games, game design, hobby, all that sorts of stuff, very welcome to do so. Otherwise, as always, I hope very much that you've enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time.